But we're here to kind of talk about service, and it's such a big word, but it's kind of, what does service really mean to advice professionals, to providers, to the wider industry? And also, is there something kind of, I guess, inherently wrong with how we think about service just now? How do we define it? How do we assess it? And are there kind of better and deeper and more nuanced ways of kind of measuring it, kind of in the context, I guess, of consumer duty and just for the future, really? So Kate has said that Steve is looking beautifully lit up. We're all very jealous of Steve's studio set up. But before I kind of go into everybody's kind of lighting and stuff, I'll introduce my guests. So we have Sian Davies-Cole, who is director at outsourced power planning firm PlanWorks. We have Jonny Black, who is Chief Commercial and Strategy Officer at Aberdeen. And we have Steve Nelson, who is Insight Director at the Lanka. So that's the kind of introductions. Steve, just to kind of set the scene, I'll hand over to you first, just to kind of talk a little bit more about background and context of the paper, I guess, a kind of why now, and perhaps maybe if you could tease some of the main findings.
Tease. Right. God, that's a big ask, Nat. Hey everyone. Yeah, there's tons of you on the webinar this morning. Thanks very much for joining. If anyone had like 30 seconds on their bingo card for which reprobate was going to try and distract me on the chat first, then Kate Shaw wins. Everybody keeps talking about lighting, which I think is a passive-aggressive way of saying you look rough in real life normally, Steve. So there we go. So service, right? Service. I guess the thing to say is that wouldn't it be great if there was this really simple origin story where I could point to a single moment in time in a meeting or a day-to-day life where I thought, right, this is something that we need to talk about or we need to address or we need to discuss further. And the truth of the matter is, that's not the case. It's a lot more nuanced than that. It's reflective of real life. Real life is chaotic, right? And things come and go and ebb and flow. So I think it's important to focus on what's true, right? So we have in the past, God, you know as well as I do, Nat, in the past few years, spoken to so many members of the advice profession through various research exercises. We're always in the field testing various bits and bobs, whether it's, I don't know, provider sentiment or new tooling or conceptual stuff or this, that, and the next thing via our amazing advisor panel, who I often forget to thank at the start of exercises like this, but the paper wouldn't have happened without them. So thank you for those of you who have taken part, and there's loads of you here today. So thanks for that. But irrespective of what you talk about and what subject you're talking about, part of the interview or the discussion always leans towards platform service, right? To some shape or form. There's so many anecdotes and so many stories about experiences of the advice profession relating to service. So that I've had that in the back of my mind for the past few years. The other thing to say, got a message from Peter saying, has it started yet? Everything's blank to me. I think you might be the only one, Peter. If you can see the chat but can't see any video, maybe refresh the browser, and just to say it works best on Chrome, if you've got access to Chrome, and Firefox second. The other thing to say is that year on year, we do a big thing called State of the Advisor Nation. It's the biggest research exercise we do by some considerable distance. Hundreds of people take part each year. And this year we had a section on providers. We had something like 6 or 7 questions, and Rich will correct me because Rich co-wrote this. Co-wrote the State of the Advisor Nation, and he co-wrote this paper with me. But we had a section with 5 or 6 questions on platforms and providers. And you look at the number one determining factor of satisfaction, service. Number one issue that causes dissatisfaction, service. The number one thing you would invest in if you had a choice, service. The one thing that you prefer the most about your primary platform, service. It's like service keeps coming through. So we had that very much in our mind as we were writing State of the Advisor Nation this year. And it and again, it's not one moment, but as we were talking in the team and as the conversations developed, we started to think, well, this notion of the word service has become too amorphous. It's become too catch-all for such a huge issue, such an important issue, right? And we think it merits further exploration to try and get under the bonnet a bit and try and figure out what it actually means. So that's kind of one thing. That's one thing that's true. The second thing, I think, and probably the most important of all, is that we had a number of kind of theories that we couldn't prove, but felt true to us based on our work out in the field. One of which is that service means fundamentally different things to different people. And yet here we have this catch-all phrase that just gets too many things lumped in. And the second thing, and probably the most important thing, is that we felt, our gut instinct was that the advice profession couldn't properly make an informed assessment of service before the point of adoption, before the point is too late, or potentially too late. So that's one of the key things that we wanted to test. And that's why the paper came about. Kind of in parallel to that, we were doing what we normally do and out speaking to lots of different organizations about various issues. And, you know, it's not like we went door to door with a briefcase going, hello, Mr. or Mrs. Agon, Mr. or Mrs. Aberdeen, could you partner with us to do a paper? As we were talking to Aberdeen about various bits and bobs, we started talking about servicing. We thought it had merit to explore as an issue. They took us up on the offer, partnered with us, which we're hugely grateful for. And here we are today, after 6 months worth of work.
Cool. Okay.
Is that all right, Nat?
That's great. Thank you, Steve.
All right.
Cool. So let me bring in our other guest just now. Sian, I'll probably kind of come to you first in terms of Steve kind of given a quite broad brush kind of perspective on service there, but a couple of things to pull out was around the kind of service means different things to different people. And there's also this sense of you can't make an informed judgment about platforms before you've actually used them. By then, you might discover that it's not the right fit for your firm or your clients. Kind of in amongst all of that, do you recognise those kind of broad highlighted findings?
Say yes.
Yeah.
Great.
You wouldn't bring me on if I said no, would you? Yes. I mean, the one thing for me, without even looking at the results or the survey or anything that's involved in this, the number one thing for me about service is do what you say you're going to do. Like, that's a really broad, very general thing. But if they're promising that they're going to do something, then they should actually do it, because we see quite a lot in our profession, providers, you know, talking the talk and selling a thing, and it looks great and it sounds great, but then when you talk to people that are using this thing, then the experience doesn't actually match up, and that's the fundamental issue. So yeah, so that was the one thing that really struck a chord for me, was do what you say we're going to do. That's kind of number one thing, I think, when it comes to service, especially when you're scoping out a new provider maybe that you haven't used or haven't had experience with, and then where you are having experience with a particular provider, it's dealing with errors. So how often are errors happening? How much are they taking accountability for those errors, and really addressing them, rather than just going, oh, we'll just pay compensation or whatever. It's, you want to have confidence that it's not going to continually happen, and it's not going to happen again. And they're thinking about the end client. They're thinking about how everybody might have been disadvantaged. And sorting it out, coming to a good resolution. That's what really good service is. It doesn't make you forget the bad issue that you might have had, but it makes you remember that actually they do sort it out, they really deal with it, and that ultimately brings it to a good end and means you can carry on using them comfortably.
Okay, great. I think that's kind of chiming with a few people kind of who are watching. Kevin says, do what you say you're going to do and in an appropriate time frame. That's pretty key.
Totally.
And Paul says, yeah, do what you promise. That's the secret to service and the secret to sales. And if the ETA looks like it's slipping, tell the client early. So that all kind of seems simple in theory, but I guess in practice, the reality is kind of a bit of a different experience. Jonny, just kind of coming to you as a kind of provider representative on this session, I guess.
Yep.
in terms of what Steve's talked about service, are there things that stick out for you? And I guess from your kind of provider perspective, what would you say about the issue of service and the actual real world impact it has when service goes wrong?
Yeah, so I think from our perspective, I mean, we've been working with Steve and the team for 6 months on this. We were kind of staring down the barrel of a very large technology upgrade that we did in February, that kind of largest ever type thing. And I guess before we really go into anything, elephant in the room, I do want to acknowledge that we know at Aberdeen our service is not where we want it to be right now, and it's not where our clients would expect it to be. And actually, that is probably more of a reason why this report for us is really important, and why right now it's really important to talk about it, because very easy to talk about service when every SLA is green, and you can deal with everything in a minute and right first time and all that kind of stuff that Sian's just talked about. But actually, we're embarking on a journey of investment and improvement and continuous improvement in our service. And when I read the paper, and with a provider lens on it, it changes how you would think about where you would invest, how you would invest, and the type of things that are important. And I think the big lesson from our perspective is it is so varied, it's so different. It's not about how often or how much you phone, how quickly you answer the call. I'm sure many of you don't want to have to phone in the first place, because if the tech was doing what it needs to do, you wouldn't have to phone, and therefore that's great service. So no call would be great service for some people, but it's different based on your role, it's different based on the firm, it's different based on your personality type. Do you want to have a chat? Do you want to do it on a digital tool? So how we can reshape our investment strategy for a much broader definition of service. And I guess my take on it is we now want to move into sort of listening mode and collaboration and community around what we'll do next, and do it together, rather than kind of just give you the provider take on service and ta-da, here you go, big grand reveal. I'd rather we all had a conversation about, if we're going to invest in this thing, what do you want us to do and how should we do it? What does good look like? And take it from there.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Steve, in terms of getting a bit deeper into the findings then, so you kind of mentioned that service means different things to different people. So maybe you could kind of unpack that a bit in terms of what advice professionals told us. But I think it kind of broadly fell into a few different camps, didn't it?
Yeah. So one thing I didn't say at the start, I hinted at that the research that we did was with our advisor panel. We did the research in 2 waves. So we conducted just under 30 in-depth interviews with the advice profession, one of which was with Sian. So thanks very much for that, Sian. Where we explored some of the issue. We were really forming our own ideas at that point as well, and starting to test some of the early conclusions with the advice profession. And we were asking open questions like, we didn't even get into platforms at the start of the interviews, Nat, didn't we? So we opened with, what does service mean to you in day-to-day life?
Yeah,
what does it actually mean? How does it make you feel? How do you expect to be treated? What's an example of good service outside of financial services, if you can think of one? What's a good example of something within financial services that isn't platforms? So it was really starting to develop that notion of, what does it mean to you?
And do you know what, just on that, Steve, sorry to butt in, but I know from the calls that I had, that was the bit that was quite interesting for me, was when you ask people, what does service mean to you, perhaps outside of FS? Because I guess the default within financial services is just to kind of say, well, all service is rubbish, and that's probably not the case. But when people kind of forced to think about, well, what does service mean to you kind of outside of work, a lot of people kind of came up with stuff which was just really nice examples of going above and beyond, like a local pharmacy that kind of got a prescription that couldn't be sourced elsewhere, or some like local deli that always like delivers really quality stuff, so it was kind of just really nice to see those examples and see that you can actually deliver good service, but maybe you just have to think about it in a different way, maybe.
Yeah, totally. And it was a amazing exercise, and one of my favorite research exercises, I think, because it became more than just about financial services and rebalancing and stuff like that, as interesting as that can be in other instances. But I guess what is constantly at the forefront of my mind with any piece of work that relates to the advice profession is this thing that we keep banging on about. And apologies if you've seen me on a webinar or on stage or whatever in the past, you'll have heard me say this countless times, that each financial advice firm or organization is unique. Whether it's the technology setup, ethos, cultural fit, attitude to investments, attitude to, modern behavioral style financial planning, all the levers that you could pull, right? And I hate to talk about the profession like this because it's the kind of ugly language that we use behind the scenes to try and figure out what stuff means, right? But when we talk about segmentation and this, that, and the next thing, so many variables, right, that can influence who you are as an organization and as a firm. So therefore, shouldn't it also hold true potentially that servicing means slightly different things to different people? Well, that feels like that's about right. So we went into that exercise. You always go into research exercises with your own biases, right? And that was kind of on my shoulder as I went into this, thinking, right, this is what we're going to get back. And it's going to be difficult to try and categorize this a bit better, or rationalize this a bit better. The model that is in the paper, and it is an imperfect model because of all those reasons that I've just outlined, is that what the profession told us via the qualitative research, and then we did a quantitative piece afterwards where we had 200, I think it was 212 members of the profession took part in that, and that's in the paper that you'll read this afternoon, hopefully. What servicing meant broadly sits in 4 different buckets. Right, this is all open to interpretation and all open to debate, but it's like a version 1.1 moving on from this amorphous catch-all phrase of service meaning too many different things. So service, and people can, if it was a Venn diagram, people define themselves in more than one bucket as well, right, as things that are important to them. But fundamentally, there's 4 different themes coming through in the interviews. Theme number 1 is the traditional definition of people, right? Servicing to me means people. It means dialing the number and it gets picked up within 4 seconds by someone who treats me well, who treats me with respect, but who knows their shit at the same time and gets it sorted. Or it could be going on a live chat and there's someone there who understands me and my business and can get me over the line. It could mean my BDM, who I've had for X number of years. And actually one of the most interesting conversations, and it wasn't actually for this exercise, but it was in my mind for this exercise. It was at the tail end of last year. I spoke to a chap who'd used a large mainstream platform, doesn't matter in the slightest who it was, for something like 15 or 16 years. It was in the teens, in the double digits. He's gone through multiple rebrands, multiple changes in senior exec, changes in strategy, changes in proposition, the move to platforms, failed replatforming exercise, blah, 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 right? But he's stuck with this organization all the way through until last year. And can anyone guess the punchline for this? It's because his BDM got made redundant. That he's now starting to question, do you know what, this chap knows me and my business so well that he acts as the buffer between my life and provider life and acts as the fixer in between. And there's so many people still invest and clearly value that model, which is probably feeling a bit more traditional, but is still like totally widespread throughout the country. So that's kind of bucket number 1. Bucket number 2 is, can I do what I expect to do myself straight away online via the technology? And any lapses in that, any uncertainty, any moment where I have to, turn left and do something else that I wasn't expected, that to me then is poor service, because I've had my expectations of self-serving online altered because of that. And who's to say they're any more right or wrong than bucket number 1? Of course they're not, because service is experiential. If we keep saying these things, we have to believe it. Service is experiential, right? So that's bucket number 2. Bucket number 3, someone on the chat articulated this. It might have been yourself, Paul, who, thanks for participating in the chat. It might have been someone else, so forgive me if it wasn't. It's more abstract. It's kind of got a combination of the first two, and it's about trust, and it's about authenticity. It's about saying, do you know what? I don't really mind all too much how this problem is fixed, so long as it's done timely and accurately, and I can kind of devolve any stress that I might have onto you as a provider to do it, right? And I know and I have faith, and it will be done and it will be picked up. And that's bucket number 3. Bucket number 4, and kind of straddles all of it in parallel. And this is a really interesting one, and I think it will resonate with almost everybody on the call today. Relates to kind of embedded sector issues as opposed to individual provider issues, and that is where the profession feels like it is being let down by everything in the round, by the kind of almost dysfunctional tripartite relationship between the regulator, manufacturers, i.e. platforms and providers, and the profession not functioning correctly. What do I mean by that? I mean things like protracted transfer times, things like a complete absence of universal letter of authority adoption within the sector. And again, it wasn't for this. It's really interesting. A lot of the best anecdotes I have for today don't specifically relate to this research exercise, but stuff that's resonated so much that I've carried it with me. And it was a conversation I had with a firm through in Glasgow in the autumn last year, where they talked about the onboarding process for a new client, where, you know, we can have the best segmentation model, we can have the best comms, we can have the best meeting, we can have the best literature, the best CRM, the best portal. But the moment that my client experiences the industry for the first time, i.e. needs to wait months for information out of a legacy provider or a master trust or a pension provider, that is when it falls down. And that's where I, as a professional, have to act as a buffer for the industry in front of my client. And that is clearly an example of poor service as well. So that's all. That's the model that we've illustrated in the paper. It is by its nature an imperfect model because it is so individual to individual people. But it's an attempt from us to try and change that conversation around this one single word, which is quite inelegant and it is inelegant and it's severely inefficient for making good decisions.
Okay,
that was a very long answer, and I'm gonna stop jabbering.
Okay. Thanks. Well, I'll get Jonny and Sian to kind of respond to all of that stuff, but I just kind of wanted to acknowledge some of the stuff in the chat. So Isabel kind of made the point around talking about industry standards. Can we have one on when to use "we are unusually busy," because after how many months does it just become usual service? So that's one thing. Sian's kind of laughing in recognition there. And I think
Totally.
Kate and Kevin had a kind of interesting conversation, which is kind of leading me to my next question. And I'll kind of put this to you, Sian, which is around this idea of the dynamic between people and tech. So I think one of the quotes that we've got in the paper is around, you know, amazing client support and amazing people are really great. And I think, Jonny, you alluded to this earlier as well. You know, having amazing people, having an amazing BDM, that's brilliant. That's kind of what you would want from your platform. But equally, if 90% of the tech is falling over and people are having to kind of mop up after that, I think this was the advisor quote, then absolutely that is not something to boast about. You shouldn't be using good people to paper over bad tech. So Sian, is that something that you kind of would see kind of from your kind of, you know, work at the sharp end, I guess?
Yeah, no, I absolutely would. And because I've been around long enough to see various different things and different provider services, products being offered, and also because I work across quite a good spectrum of, you know, I work a lot with financial planning firms that are using platforms in their daily business. I, you know, work with firms to help them look at which ones to use and things like that. So, you know, that is the majority of the work that firms are doing is on platforms. So that's why, you know, focusing on that for this conversation and the paper, absolutely, that's, you know, it makes complete sense. But we shouldn't ignore, obviously, you talked about legacy providers, you know, that's a massive, horrible part of our profession that we have to deal with. But also, actually, it's not just those legacy plans where we have issues with. There are other providers out there that we have to use. I work a lot with like complex stuff, so trust stuff and EIS, VCT, those kinds of things where they're not usually on platforms. They're usually you go directly to another provider. And there's an absolutely stark difference when you've got somebody, a BDM usually, that you can talk to, because you absolutely can trust in that person that they know exactly what they're talking about. And when you get into a complex area of product, it's obviously really important as well, because they know more than we do. So it's the people side of it. You can absolutely understand why that is so important. But again, how do you understand whether or not the people are great and really helpful, and that's covering up some not so great tech or some processes that are a bit antiquated, or is it just they're a great person and actually the tech's great as well? It's really hard to know the truth, I guess, as well sometimes, because I've had this experience even recently. We'll say something about one particular platform, and then another platform will come in and say, yeah, but did you know that they do this and they do that? And it's like, well, no, I didn't, and they didn't tell me that. So is that true, or is that how they used to do it, and you're just bad mouthing them? You never really know the truth, and that's the problem with this whole thing about service is there's so many people that will say so many things, but actually it's because we don't forget as well. Just because 5 years ago pension transfers were bad on a particular platform, it's like, no, actually, have they sorted that out and employed a load of good people and introduced a load of good tech that actually has solved that issue? Because you wouldn't know it from talking to a lot of people about certain things. So that's kind of that's a difficult part of this this whole process. And for me, I've looked quite a lot at kind of I'm going to use like ESG as a term, but it's not really that, of platforms, and looking after their people comes into
governance type stuff.
Yeah, like people processes, how they're reporting their figures about diversity within their workforce and things like that. That's I'm finding some providers are really out there and they're happy to put it out there. The numbers aren't necessarily something to shout about, but they're still putting them out there, which is the key thing. As long as they're putting them out there, then we can understand what that looks like, and see what, because if they're looking after their people, then they're not the ones that are maybe not the ones that are making them redundant, which then leaves you to fear for moving to a different provider in and around the industry. But it's really tricky, and I think investing in people is obviously it is expensive. It is maybe it is like looking at it a bit more of an old school way of doing business, where we've got so much tech now, but it's just an adding to the whole proposition. You can't have one without the other. And I can't remember who said it earlier, but I think it was you, Jonny, having to make a phone call, like you shouldn't have to make the phone call in the first place, but actually some people really deal well with only making phone calls. I guess it's just about making sure then the business, the firm actually has people that are dealing with the digital side of things. Yeah, and you've got the choice, and if it comes to it, you can then make that call and speak to somebody that you can trust, that picks up the phone fairly promptly and doesn't fob you off for 10 days to get you an answer.
Yeah, and just looking at the chat here, so Matthew talks about, for him, good service means not being let down time and time again. And he says, by that definition, based on my experience, and we use lots of them, there isn't a single platform out there offering good service, which is pretty damning. And I think actually that's something that came up in one of my chats as well. Somebody said there's no one person who would deliver what I'd say is good service, which is a pretty bad state of affairs. But I think there are people who are delivering good service, but it can be hard to see that when maybe you have to wade through rubbish processes or whatever it happens to be. And Paul talks about the IT being key, because if you take the workload off the call centre, you free up the people to solve the more human, complex problems that you were talking about, Sian. So Jonny, you've kind of been waiting patiently, so thanks for that. So is there anything amongst all of that that you kind of want to particularly respond to? And I know you talked earlier about kind of, taking your own lessons in terms of having read the paper and seen all of the kind of, the report majors quite a lot on advisor feedback. So is there anything that you're kind of taking away from that in terms of processes that you'll adapt or things that you'll invest in particularly?
There's probably, and actually it ties in quite nicely to some of the comments that are coming through as well, is so we would describe ourselves as a tech-enabled people business. So people are at the core of what we do, because nothing works without our people. The tech is just there to enable and make their lives easier, make our clients' lives easier, make their clients' lives easier. But fundamentally, it's about the people. So I think whilst we've got people, tech, and reliability and kind of that lobbying more general piece, everything comes through from how we develop out our people, how we empower them, how we educate them, train them, and develop them. And in the context of, and I think we've got to do more of this internally within Aberdeen as an example, is help to connect the dots that show how everybody impacts service. Doesn't really matter what role you're in the organization, whether, and I'm sitting in our call centers just on the other side of this wall, and they're very explicitly aware of how they impact service. But actually down the corridor, there's the proposition and design team that are setting up what the next big upgrade will be, or there's the marketing team, or there's the BDMs or the BRMs, or there's the control team that are looking at money laundering and financial crime and how we can make sure that your clients are safe when they use the platform. Everything that I've just said, based on what I've read in the report, is service, but people are not sort of pulling that thread together, and that connection, I think, once that lands, becomes really powerful, because it should in theory change the behavior and the prioritization of what it is we want to do. And that for me is the big what next, is right, with that focus, with that prioritization mindset, let's redefine this, let's go broad and listen and kind of shape that through. So lots to do, lots to take away. And look, perception is reality. If people don't think that there is a provider providing good service, then there's not a provider providing good service. It's as simple as that, because service is what you experience. It's not what somebody tells you you've experienced. So we need to really go and address that point.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. So Ricky, thanks for your point about consumer duty. We have gone 35 minutes without mentioning consumer duty. I will come back to it later, but not right now. But I wanted just to pick up on this point that sort of Tracy and Tim are discussing around the awards and ratings piece. So Steve, I'll come to you for that. Steve looks shocked by that. So in terms of, I think you'd said at the top, people can't make an informed judgment about platforms. They can't try before they buy, and then once they've kind of made the leap, it might be too late. There's also a kind of parallel issue that we kind of uncovered alongside that, is that there's a real kind of lack of trust and faith in the systems that are trying to help people do the due diligence before they make that jump. So the service awards, the ratings, the data, all of that stuff. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that and maybe how that's shaping our own thinking?
Not really.
No? Do you want me to talk about it?
I do want to talk about it. It's one of those things where, you commit pen to paper or keys to ink,
Screen.
the PDF, the screen, keys to screen. And or you have a sense that it might cause a bit of a stink, right? And this is one of them. So let's be absolutely clear and explicit as to what's going on here, right? So in the first round of research, so in the interviews, you will remember very well, Nat, that we presented a statement to those that we interviewed. We had a hilarious instance when we were speaking to Sian, because Sian and a couple of your colleagues were on the call, and you treated it like it was almost like Strictly Come Dancing. So we got people to rate a statement between 1 and 10 live on the interview as to what extent you agreed, and you all held up your numbers. It was very it was adorable.
7.
Adorable, yeah. You took it very seriously. But I forget the exact statement, but it was along the lines of the profession can't make an informed judgment, doesn't trust awards and ratings. It's a part of the sector that's fundamentally broken and needs readdressed. That, broadly speaking, that's what it was. And I think the mean average score was something like 8.8, coming through loads of 10s, loads of like clear agreement. We then presented a slightly softer or series of more neutral statements in the quantitative research, because we were mindful that, you know, we just had this often quite animated discussion about service in the interviews, where was that too leading a question, right? Let's test this via quant. Huge agreement came through, and in the statement, I feel like I can't make an informed judgment based on awards and ratings. Something like just over 70% rated at between 8 and 10 on the agree scale. If you include 7 for, you know, agreement but slightly less agreement, that's something like 85%, right? So I think it's, again, I said something similar at the start of the webinar. I think it's important to take a step back and look at what's true in all of this, right? So certainly what's true from my perspective is I don't want this to be a hatchet job on awards and ratings, right? I've yet to either be in a process, be in a judging process where I felt this isn't right. You know, the sector is full of people trying to do the right thing, trying to make the right assessments based on the information at hand, right? That's the important point here. It's also really difficult to do it and to do it well. So that's true. It's the same with servicing, right? There's no organization that wants to give bad service. They're all full of great people trying to do their best because it's important. It's the right thing to do. So that's true. So let's put that in a box over here and just, you know, you can either have faith in what I've said or you can't, but that's how I feel based on my experience. But for the purposes of this exercise, this research exercise and making progress within the sector, there's 3 things. One thing is the thing I said at the start about service being the #1 important metric or determining factor for satisfaction and dissatisfaction. So I believe that to be true. So that's #1. #2, there's a huge collective spend on ratings, awards, assessments, due diligence processes, disclosing information, due diligence packs, all the stuff in the round that's meant to help fundamentally make the advice profession feel more informed and make the right judgments and justifications on behalf of your clients. That's also true. Everything we do in the sector, you draw a line to client money. It's all funded by client money, and that's true, right? You put that in a box. And #3, the profession is telling us they can't make an informed judgment. So if we believe that it's the most important thing, if we believe we're spending a shitload of time and money trying to do the right thing, but we still have outcome #3 that you ladies and gents, loads of whom are on the call today, can't make that informed judgment, then it's incumbent on us. That's a mandate from the profession. Say you have to look at this differently. We have to explore this differently. We have to. I don't have the answer right now on 8th of June, having just finished this exercise, but we have a mandate from the profession to look at this issue and do it better. And that's, I guess, my perspective from the research now.
Okay, great, thanks. And thanks for your comment, Dean, around kind of how you're approaching due diligence and having to kind of consider lots of different things: service, ability to meet SLAs, reliability and speed to resolve issues, and just the huge impact that IT changes have when platforms make them, and the focus on functionality rather than client and advisor experience and impact. I think that probably resonate with a lot of people. So let's try and address the consumer duty piece then. So obviously the consumer duty drum is banging away in the background, and we're kind of counting down to the deadline when it's kind of implemented for everybody. But Sian, maybe if I could come to you first in terms of how you feel that consumer duty might change platform due diligence in the context of service.
Oh, that's really interesting. I think it probably leads into what we're talking about really here, which is like, you know, having some sort of ratings or awards or things like that. So having access to data points would be really useful, I think, across the board between the providers, so that you can compare really easily those bits of information, so you can see what they look like. I don't think any of us have got a handle on how to really do that really well. And I've experienced a bit of this as well, where trying to compare it was workplace pension scheme, so it's a bit different. But trying to get some information out of them about which one offers a good service. I can look at how many members, parts of with that scheme or that scheme or that scheme, but that doesn't give me any information about how quick they are to SLAs against the same thing. So I can say, well, that one's quicker than that one. So maybe that will make things a bit more clear, because they're going to have to be much more tight on how they communicate, how they provide their service, and that will lead to hopefully things like SLAs being a bit more transparent, a bit more easy to compare. Maybe I think the obvious thing is that we hope that service will get better with Consumer Duty. Personally, I don't expect like a massive impact on platforms, because although we are saying that the service on them, some people are saying service, there's no one platform that provides good service, but I'm very much, I spend a lot of my time dealing with legacy schemes. That service is atrocious. So that's where I see there needing to be a massive change in our profession. And that's my hope, is that they can put the amount of effort in to Consumer Duty that they need to make things better. Because when you compare that to platforms are like gold. They're amazing. But these other providers, they're just absolutely atrocious. Refusing to send things by email. Everything is 10 working days just to reply to one little answer. It's really bad. And we're talking into like sending out LOAs and things like that here. Which is what I spend quite a bit of time doing. So that's it's not me saying I know things aren't awful, because things with platforms, we have our issues with service. I know that, and we do see that as well. But it is just kind of just hoping things will get better. And I really, my one major hope is that the way that we can compare different providers is going to be much easier to do. It's not about there being I'm a power planner. I love data. Like, give me all the data, but is the data available right now? Not really. In a like for like situation, and that's what we need. We need like for like comparable numbers that we can compare across the market, so that we can make really informed decisions. Because even then, you need actuals. So someone said earlier about SLAs, don't just quote 10 working days for a response. I'm happy with them saying like 5 to 10 days is our SLA, but what's the real life data behind that? So 5 to 10 days is our standard SLA. Normally we respond in that amount of time. That would be great, because then you're kind of, oh, right, now I know what I'm expecting. So something like that would be really useful. That's just it's something that I've struggled before to get out of any provider, consistently, like data on complaints. And I'm not talking about the high numbers that they have to give out. It's the real life data that you want, that actually tells you something.
Okay, great. I've got an image in my head of you, Sian, now going like, show me the data, Jerry Maguire style. And I can see that Mike's Consumer Duty klaxon has gone off, because he's piped up to say, good service is a given post Consumer Duty, pretty much a direct quote from the FCA at an event I attended earlier this year. So that's causing some laughing emojis. But so that's the aim, that's the dream. Jonny, kind of just coming to you on all of this. When you're kind of absorbing all of this stuff, is this something that you're thinking about in terms of, I guess, in the context of Consumer Duty, but more broadly about how do you actually evidence the service that you deliver?
Yeah, I mean, so specifically from a Consumer Duty perspective, where that is heading our conversations towards is that broader definition of service. So clearly we have average speed to answer, average handling time, and if we've got time, I can come back to Carol's comment, because I can not leave that hanging type thing and explain where we are on that. But it's that broader definition really linked to the piece around foreseeable harm, because actually service needs to be how everything joins up, and where there are gaps or things could fall through or data points could be manually typed in, because back to, well, if the tech's not where it needs to be and people step in, people are human, you know, a zero in the wrong place, a decimal point in the wrong place, things suddenly explode. So I think that's where our conversations really kind of narrowed in on, particularly with a consumer duty lens. But there's lots that then kind of rolls off the back of that in terms of how we want to prioritize, specifically on sharing data. And Sian, we should invite you in for a day, because we are drowning in data. It's sometimes a bit daunting how much data we have in terms of real time, kind of on my screen, what's going on across the 120 people that are running old school definition of service. The reality is, what we need to work out is how do we distill that and share that in a way that I could unlock that tomorrow, right? I could just put that on the website. In fact, we've got some of it on the website now. But if you can't compare it to anything, bluntly, every provider could pick a hero stat and give you the hero stat, right? That's absolutely meaningless. So what we need to work together on is a common language set. So we're kind of in the background building some stuff that we're interested in terms of what do we think is relevant. Ultimately, how can we make sure our clients' businesses are as efficient as possible when they use Aberdeen? I imagine the exact same conversation is happening at Aviva, Quilter, whoever, and then join that up and say that this is what we're doing, this is how we are spending and investing and developing our people and training and pathways for careers and all that kind of good stuff. And then you can make an informed choice, because at the minute it's just too difficult to compare, and you know, marketing can make things really straightforward or really difficult.
Okay, thanks for that. So Steve, just as we kind of like draw all of this stuff to a close, then obviously we've covered a lot of ground here, and there's loads in the report. So obviously we would encourage people to go and read the advisor feedback and stuff for themselves and our findings and stuff. And we've also kind of given a bit of a start of the 10 on some of the maybe better or more considered due diligence questions that people might want to ask around this stuff. But for you, Steve, what do you kind of want people to take away from the report? And I guess what next? You know, we've done the talking shop, but what next?
Yeah, thanks, Nat. So we've got God, don't ask me what they all are, but there's a 7-point action plan.
Calls to action type stuff.
Calls to action, that's the phrase that I'm scrambling for. Because the paper's called Answering the Call, right? It's a double meaning, because we want the industry to answer our call. Yeah, it's clever, Steve, you're right.
I got it.
But there's a number of different things I think we should do and can do immediately. One is, can we agree as a sector that we need to explore this issue? Are we correct? Are we up for this? It feels too important not to. Another one is, I would like to see better representation from other parts of the advice profession throughout the sector. Like loads of great people in the media who you see time and time again, but we don't have effective, I believe, representation of paraplanners, compliance staff, administrators, who they are like often the gatekeepers to a better life for the profession, because they understand how the systems work, they understand operationally what's needed from providers. So let's have better collaboration. Speaking of collaboration, we have a fundamental issue in the sector between that tripartite relationship between the regulator, the manufacturers, and the profession. Say it time and time and time again. We've got a profession that doesn't trust the regulator. Frankly, the regulator could do the world a ton of good by doing something about universal letter of authority, or doing something about transfer times, and actually regulating against some of the poorer behaviour out there and mandating certain things. It would build so much faith back into the profession as well. And that's me being on the hallucinogenics again, I'm afraid, because I doubt that's going to happen. But in my perfect view of the world, I think that should happen. We need collaboration around data. Both Sian and Jonny hinted at it, but if all that happens is we continue to work in silos and individual providers get better at disclosing data, we will still walk into the same issues of lack of comparability and rationalization of what it means. One example is we've illustrated, I'm going to get it wrong, but we've illustrated an example at the end of the paper. You've got provider A says they've got a 95% answer rate within X seconds. Provider B says they've got a 98 point something % answer rate, therefore B's better, right? You can't You can't conclude that unless you know what are the resolution rates, how many of those calls are first-time calls, what are the implications of the balance of calls that aren't answered. Do they relate to critical, like real shit, getting real moments around withdrawals, around valuations, around errors, around clients getting their money on time? We need some form of architecture or framework that provides an interface for the profession to go, I can make a better informed decision because of these data points, even if it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 new ones, to try and make that. And we need to work cross-party, cross-sector to make that happen. Anybody who does ratings, this is the last thing I'll say, anybody who does ratings or awards should publish the methodology, publish the sample sizes, publish how you did it, because I think working practices are significantly better than people think. But let's prove it, and let's build more faith back into the sector on that front. And we are taking our own medicine on that front. We've always published the methodology in the reporting that we do, but we're pressing pause on our ratings process till we do this better as well. So yeah, loads of stuff for us to do, loads and loads of stuff.
Cool, thanks for that, Steve. So thanks for everybody for getting involved in the chat. There was some really interesting kind of threads there around the difference between D2C service versus advised, and somebody making an existential point, are we part of the problem on platform service, which is too big to go into just here, but kind of one to think about. Steve, thanks ever so much, everyone, for that discussion. That was all really useful. Steve, I kind of want to hand back to you now, because part of what we do when we do our advisor interviews as a way of saying thank you and kind of giving back is putting people into a charity prize draw, which I think you're going to do now. I'm
going to do now. This is like the most exciting time of my life, frankly. Yeah, so any isolated research exercise we do, first of all, we always give the data back to the people who participate. So anyone who participated in the research that went into this paper got the headlines a few days ago before anyone else in the sector sees that. And that's a point on faith and trust and respect for data, so that it's not abstracted away and the next time you see it's in money marketing. It's the right thing. It's your views and your opinions. So you get it first. So that's the marketing spiel. Second thing is go into a prize draw, and two participants get 250 quid from us as a thank you to give to either a charity, a local cause, an initiative that means something to them. And it's brilliant. It's genuinely brilliant when you hear these stories. We've had, wildlife conservation. We've had local, like play groups where buildings falling down. They needed a new roof. We've had the stereotypical bigger stuff around Macmillan, for example, but it's always meant something, and it's really humbling to read those stories. Anyway, we're going to do the draw. We've got 212 members of the profession who took part, and I'm going to get people watching to love bomb the chat with numbers between 1 and 212, and I'm just going to pick a couple. I don't know who's got which number. I've randomized the order. It's not an alphabetical order, and I'm going to take a couple of the first ones that I see.
Go, go, go.
Go, go, go. I'm going to close my eyes and then open them again. Now, you tell me, are there numbers coming through?
Right, there are. Yeah, there are. I'm going to call it in 3, 2, 1. Stop. Open your eyes.
Stop. So that's 6 and 96 were the numbers that I saw. 6 and 96. Stop. There's a time delay. You can stop doing numbers.
This is the way to get people involved in the chat.
It really is, yeah. So 6 and 96.
Well,
GDPR,
6 and 96.
Yeah, so GDPR prohibits me from sharing email addresses. But if your name is Derek Satterthwaite, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, you're getting an email from me later. And James King, I think I recognise James King. I will be in touch. Congratulations, 6 and 96. Thanks for confirming that, Paul. I will,
Our official adjudicator.
Handy. We will remember that, won't we?
We will. We think we've got it captured in the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Last thing to say, paper launches at 12 this afternoon. Get it from the Lancat Financial website. You'll be hearing from us. I'll be talking about it from now for the foreseeable future. So thank you. Sorry, Nat, did I just bust your closing chat?
No, you didn't. That's a perfect closing chat. Yeah, I just emphasise you can download the paper from our website from 12 p.m. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for getting involved with the chat and the draw. Thank you to our willing and open and frank participants. So to Sian, to Jonny and to Steve, really appreciate you giving up the time and to kind of chat this all through with us. Thanks ever so much for joining. We'll see you again soon.